The past, the present, and the future. Black history is Frederick Douglass,
Phyllis Wheatley,
Eugene Jacques Bouillard,
Josephine Baker,
Paul Robeson,
Althea Gibson,
Leon Higginbotham,
Ella Fitzgerald,
Lionel Hampton,
Jackie Joyner Kersey,
Michael Jordan,
Betty Shabazz,
Miles Davis,
Dorothy Height,
Colin Powell,
Carol Mosley Braun. Black history is yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Black people all over the world were enslaved, degraded, segregated, stripped of their humanity. Was there ever a time when Nubians were controllers over their own destiny? These were questions that the late Chancellor Williams sought to answer. Dr. Chancellor Williams, an African American, was born in 1898 in South Carolina. Growing up during segregation, Williams, an inquisitive child, often asked questions about why blacks were relegated to an inferior status. Upon reaching adulthood, Chancellor dedicated his life to extensive research on black culture, the rise and fall of a great people. After 16 years of research and field studies through 26 African nations, Dr. Williams's findings culminated in the book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. He discovered that Africa was the cradle of civilization, that the continent was a land of kings and queens, and that Africans were experts in a variety of disciplines reflecting an advanced society. It was Dr. Williams's book that led Washington, D.C. photographer David Oggi Ogburn to seek and meet the doctor, forming a lasting relationship built upon seeking truth and enlightenment and the appreciation of black history and culture. Photographer Oggi Ogburn speaks of his legacy.
You know, just left the Woodner Hotel where 30 years ago is when I met Chancellor Williams. And the reason I got into him in his Egyptian philosophy and what he did in his book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, all started when a friend of mine around the holiday season in 1974 gave me an ankh, which, you know, I didn't know what it was. It was like a wooden ankh. He gave me two, one for my girlfriend and one for me. And so I'm saying, well, what is this? You know, what is an ankh? And he said it's the Egyptian symbol of life. And from that point on, there's a story that I'm getting ready to tell that's very exciting and it's believable. What happened was, after I got the ankh, which was in January, I had gone to New York. I'm from New York originally. And I'm in my old bedroom, and in the bookcase was a book called Ancient Egypt. Now, the first time I even had Egypt on my mind was when he gave me Ankh, Egyptian symbol of life. So now there's a book that I'm reading about ancient Egypt. And there was a line in the book that said that Egypt was blessed by nature. And for some reason, I had to adopt Egypt as my home. Even though I was from New York, and you go to a school like Howard where you have a lot of friends that are from different countries and places, when they talked about home, it was a lot different from the way I felt about home. So at that point, I adopted Egypt as my home. So, you know, this was in March when I see this book. So there was a picture in the book of a jewel that astonished me. It was just so beautiful in the colors. So I said, a friend of mine who gave me the ankh was also an artist. I said, when I came back to DC, I wanted him to paint this picture of this jewel for me. And, you know, so now we're in March, and I'm coming back to DC, and I want him to paint this picture. So I do run into another artist, and I give him a canvas, and I ask him to paint the picture, and he took it, and he started painting it. Now, we're into the summer now. The summer comes along, and there's this young lady that's going to UCLA. I went to her apartment, and while she was in there doing the meal, she told me to stay out in the living room. And I was looking at the bookcase that she had in the living room, and this book caught my eyes. It was called The Destruction of Black Civilization. Now, I don't know why I picked up the book, but I did, and I looked through it, but it was about Egypt from a black perspective. My mind was totally blown, because I had no idea of the things that the Egyptians had did. I had no idea that the Egyptians were black, or black Africans. It's kind of funny, if you can go to school all your life and still not be knowledgeable of your own history. And unfortunately, for the 60s, because of the 60s, a lot of the historians like Chancellor Williams, who wrote the book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, and several of his colleagues like Yusef Ben-Jochannan and John Henry Clark, they began to go over the history that had been written, but they had different interpretations. So what had happened was, I get this book from her, and I tell her I got to look at it. So what happened was, I would bring the book home, and I just read a little bit of it. And a little bit of it was so profound to me that I would close it up and I would just meditate and say, wow, I had no idea that there was a queen in Zinga who was in Angola, who fought the Portuguese and beat them. She was a master in military fighting, I says, wow. That Monday, I was asking the guy who I gave the canvas to, how was the picture coming along? He said it was coming along great. That Tuesday, a magazine asked me, did I want to go to Egypt? And naturally, I was astonished, like, wow, of course I'd like to go to Egypt. So this was Tuesday. On Wednesday, I went and got some shots. On Thursday, I was headed to New York. And on Friday, I was on my way to Egypt. Now, to be honest with you, when I look at that whole scenario, how that went down from January to now it's September, how I had been sort of preparing myself for the trip. And I also believe that it was divine intervention. So now I'm in Egypt, and I'm running into the Sphinx and the pyramids, and you go to the Egyptian Museum, and what astonished me, I saw that jewel that knocked me out, and I was very humble. I was very humble. I was looking at mighty things. And what really also astonished me was when you start reading about the pyramids and the Sphinx being built 2,500 years before Christ was born, it sort of put it in another perspective. And at that moment, I was astonished, and I took 1,000 pictures. And when I came home, I was just felt that I was just so blessed to have gone through that whole scenario from January to September. So I'm back from Egypt.